They say power bows to bloodlines, but the night that throne caught fire, every noble in that palace learned the truth. Destiny doesn't ask permission. One servant girl, one impossible flame, and an empire that would rather watch her burn than admit prophecy chose wrong. If you want to know what happens when the forgotten become unstoppable, stick around until the end. Drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from, because this story is about to shatter everything you thought you knew about crowns and the wolves who wear them. Serenya Vale had stopped counting the stairs. 43 flights from the servant quarters to the War Council chamber, 68 from the kitchens to the Imperial wing, 112 from the cellar where she slept to the Celestial Dome where nobles drank wine that cost more than her life. Numbers were easier than names. Numbers didn't expect you to matter. The marble beneath her feet had been quarried from conquered kingdoms. The banners hanging from vaulted ceilings bore the sigils of families who had ruled for 7 generations. Everything in Iron Crown Palace whispered the same message. You are beneath this. You were born beneath this. You will die beneath this. Serenya carried the wine pitcher with both hands. Her fingers ached. The clay was older than she was, heavier than it looked, and if she dropped it, they would dock her rations for a month. Maybe longer. Maybe forever. The Festival of Ascension had turned the palace into a circus of silk and steel. Generals polished their medals, noble women sharpened their smiles. Everyone pretended the empire wasn't rotting from the inside, that rebellions weren't festering in the outer territories, that the throne wasn't one bad harvest away from civil war. Serenya knew better. Servants always knew better. They heard the whispers nobles thought were private. They saw the cracks in armor, the tremors in hands that signed execution orders, the fear hiding behind golden masks. Power wasn't strength. Power was performance. And every single person in that palace was terrified of forgetting their lines. She moved through the corridor like smoke, silent, invisible. A shadow trained to exist without existing, to serve without being seen, to breathe without taking up space someone important might need. Her mother had been a servant too. Serenya barely remembered her face. Fever had taken her when Serenya was 6. The palace buried her in the common grave beyond the eastern wall where they dumped everyone who died without rank, without name, without mattering. No marker, no ceremony, no proof she had ever lived. Serenya learned early. The empire did not mourn the expendable. The War Council chamber smelled like leather and blood. Not fresh blood, old blood. The kind that soaked into stone and never washed out no matter how hard you scrubbed. She had scrubbed plenty. General Corvain stood at the head of the obsidian table, a man built like a siege weapon, all shoulders and scars. His voice carried the lazy cruelty of someone who had killed so many people that death bored him. We torch the villages, he said. Every single one that refused the grain tax. Make an example. Let the outer provinces remember what defiance costs. Across from him, Lady Ceres tapped one jeweled finger against her wine glass. She was older than Corvain, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. Cruelty in a man was expected. Cruelty in a woman with 3 decades of political survival was an art form. Torching villages creates martyrs, she said. Martyrs create songs. Songs create revolutions. If we are going to crush dissent, General, let us do it quietly. Corvain grunted. Quietly doesn't scare anyone. Ceres smiled. It scares the right people. Serenya refilled their glasses and did not exist. That was the trick. Existing got you noticed. Getting noticed got you questions. Questions led to expectations, and expectations were how servants got broken. She had learned to fold herself into furniture, to become part of the architecture. A table did not have opinions. A chair did not make eye contact. A wine pitcher did not flinch when generals joked about burning children alive. You survive by shrinking, her mother had whispered once, in one of the few memories Serenya still carried. You survive by making yourself so small they forget you can bleed. It had worked for 18 years. Until tonight. The Celestial Dome had been built to make mortals feel insignificant. It worked. The ceiling arced 100 feet overhead, painted with constellations that marked every conquest in Valor's blood-soaked history. Columns wide as ancient trees framed the space, wrapped in gold and iron. At the center of it all sat the Ember Throne. No one had seen it burn in 3 generations. The last flame sovereign had died decades ago, childless, leaving behind only prophecy and myth. The throne waited, silent, cold. A relic of a power the Empire had stopped believing in because belief required humility, and humility did not build empires. Serenya entered through the servants' passage, carrying a tray of crystal glasses that probably cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. The dome was packed. Every noble house had sent representatives. War commanders in ceremonial armor, merchant lords who had bought their titles with blood money, courtesans draped in silk that whispered when they moved. And at the edge of the dais, surrounded by admirers like a queen holding court before coronation, stood Lady Varessa Dorn. Serenya had seen her before. Everyone had seen her before. Varessa did not allow invisibility. She was tall, sharp-featured, and beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, elegant, cold, and designed to cut. Her hair fell in a dark cascade over bare shoulders. Her gown shimmered like oil on water, black and green and poison bright. Diamonds glittered at her throat, each one worth more than a village. But it was her eyes that told the truth. Hungry. Varessa looked at the Ember Throne the way a wolf looked at wounded prey. She had been raised to expect it, trained for it, promised it by bloodline and prophecy, misread by priests too desperate for certainty to admit they were guessing. Serenya set the tray down on the serving table and stepped back into the shadows where she belonged. The High Regent called the hall to order. His voice boomed across marble and gold. Tonight we honor the Ascension, the ancient right that binds flame to empire, power to destiny. Let those who carry the sacred blood step forward. Varessa moved like she had already won. She ascended the dais steps with her head high, her spine straight, her smile sharp enough to carve bone. Applause rippled through the dome. Nobles nodded approvingly. This was expected. This was right. This was a woman born to rule, raised in luxury, trained in politics and war, descended from 7 generations of imperial blood. Destiny was supposed to choose people like her. Serenya stood at the edge of the room and felt something shift inside her chest. Not jealousy. Something older. The regent gestured toward the throne. Approach Lady Varessa. Let the flames decide. Varessa stepped forward. The throne remained cold. She stepped closer. Nothing. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, too fast for most to catch. But Serenya saw it. Fear. Raw and desperate and furious. The kind of fear that came from realizing the world might not bend the way you had been promised. Varessa placed both hands on the armrests. The throne stayed dark. Whispers started to curl through the crowd like smoke. Then someone knocked into Serenya from behind. A nobleman, drunk and careless, stumbled past her, shoving her forward. She tried to catch herself, but the marble was polished smooth, and her worn shoes had no grip. She fell. Not hard. Not dramatically. Just a servant losing her balance, a body hitting stone. Nothing important, nothing worth noticing. Except her hand landed on the base of the Ember Throne, and the world caught fire. Light exploded from beneath her palm. Silver flames erupted along the throne's ancient carvings, racing up the obsidian like lightning given form. Heat slammed through the chamber. The air itself seemed to scream. Serenya tried to pull away, but the fire held her, not burning, not hurting, just wrapping around her wrist like recognition, like welcome, like destiny finally exhaling after holding its breath for centuries. The dome went silent. Every eye turned toward her. Varessa stood 3 feet away, her face twisted into something beyond rage, beyond shock, something that looked like a person watching their entire future collapse in real time. Serenya's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to speak, but her throat had locked shut. The High Regent stared at her like she had just committed murder in front of witnesses. Then Varessa's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold and lethal. "Arrest her!" The words dropped like stones into water. Guards moved before anyone could question the order. Serenya barely registered their hands on her arms, the iron cuffs biting into her wrists. Everything felt distant, unreal, like watching herself drown from underwater. Varessa stepped closer, her smile returning, sharper now, meaner. "This girl has no bloodline," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the dome. "No training, no right to stand before the throne. Clearly she has tampered with sacred relics. Clearly, this is corruption." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the nobles. Of course it was corruption. What else could it be? The alternative was unthinkable. The alternative meant prophecy had chosen a servant over a lady, a nobody over someone who mattered, chaos over the order that kept their world spinning. The Empire did not fear monsters, it feared uncertainty, and nothing was more uncertain than a throne that refused to follow the rules. Serenya was dragged from the dome in chains. Behind her, Varessa's voice rose above the crowd, sweet and venomous. "We will discover the truth, and when we do, justice will be swift." The crowd applauded. Justice always sounded noble when it was aimed at someone disposable. The holding cells beneath the palace smelled like rust and urine. Serenya sat on a stone bench, her wrists raw from the moonsteel-laced cuffs. They burned against her skin, not with heat, but with a cold that sank into bone. Moonsteel suppressed magic. She had heard the guards talk about it once, laughing about how they used it on prisoners who thought they were special, thought they had power, thought they mattered. The irony was not lost on her. Hours passed, maybe days. Time moved differently in the dark. No one came to explain. No one offered water. No one told her what happened next. She knew anyway. Trials in Valor were not about truth. They were about maintaining order, and order required a scapegoat. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Serenya looked up as a figure appeared outside the bars. Varessa. She stood in the torchlight like a portrait of controlled fury, her gown replaced with something simpler but no less expensive. Her face was calm. Too calm. That was worse than rage. "You must be confused," Varessa said quietly. Serenya said nothing. Varessa stepped closer to the bars. "You must be wondering why this happened, why the throne responded to you, why destiny chose wrong." The words landed like poison. "It did not choose wrong," Varessa continued. "It chose nothing. Because you are nothing, a glitch, an accident, a malfunction in a system that has worked perfectly for centuries." Serenya's voice came out hoarse. "I did not ask for this." Varessa's smile could have cut glass. "That does not matter. You touched something that was never yours to touch. And now the Empire is watching, waiting, wondering if their entire hierarchy is built on lies." She leaned closer, her eyes cold as winter. "I cannot allow that." Serenya met her gaze and saw the truth there. Varessa was not angry because Serenya had stolen something. She was terrified because Serenya had revealed something. That power did not care about bloodlines, that destiny did not respect inheritance, that everything Varessa had been promised, everything she had built her identity around, was a lie someone had told her to keep her obedient. And obedience, when shattered, turned into wrath. "The trial will be tomorrow," Varessa said. "The sovereign tribunal will demand you prove your purity. You will transform before the throne, and when your spirit form reveals itself as corrupted, as twisted, as wrong, they will execute you before sunset." She turned to leave. Serenya's voice stopped her. "What if I am not corrupted?" Varessa paused. Then, she said without turning around, "You will wish you were." Her footsteps faded into silence. Serenya sat alone in the dark, and felt something inside her crack open. Not fear. Not anymore. Something older than fear, something that had been sleeping her entire life, buried beneath years of invisibility and survival and swallowing her voice to stay alive. Rage. Not the hot, reckless kind. The cold kind. The kind that did not explode. The kind that waited. And when the waiting was over, it did not just burn, it transformed. The tribunal convened at dawn. The chamber was designed to make the accused feel small. It succeeded. Black pillars rose toward a ceiling painted with scenes of divine judgment. Emperors kneeling before flames, traitors burning in silver fire, prophecy carving itself into history with blood and ash. The High Regent sat on an elevated platform, wrapped in crimson robes that made them look like open wounds. 3 of them. Old, powerful, and utterly certain of their righteousness. Certainty was the most dangerous thing a person could carry. It made cruelty feel like duty. Serenya stood in the center of the chamber, her hands still cuffed, her body exhausted from a night without sleep. Around her, the gallery filled with nobles, soldiers, and spectators who had come to watch justice be performed like theater. Varessa sat in the front row, her posture perfect, her expression serene. She had already won. Everyone knew it. The only question was how long the execution would take. The lead regent spoke, his voice heavy with authority that had never been questioned. Serenya Vale. You stand accused of corrupting sacred relics, of manipulating forces beyond your station, of committing sacrilege against the Ember Throne. How do you answer? Serenya's throat was dry. I touched nothing intentionally, she said. I fell. The throne responded. That is all I know. A lie, Veressa said smoothly from her seat. The throne has been dormant for decades. It does not simply awaken for accidents. Then why did it awaken for you? Serenya shot back. The gallery gasped. Servants did not speak to nobles that way. Servants did not speak at all. Veressa's smile tightened. It did not awaken for me because I have not yet completed the ritual. But it will. Once this corruption is cleansed, the regent raised a hand for silence. There is one way to determine truth, he said. The accused will transform before the Ember Throne. If her spirit form is pure, she will be spared. If it is corrupted, she will burn. Serenya's pulse hammered in her ears. She had never transformed. She had felt it inside her, coiled and waiting, something vast and burning and wrong. She had spent her entire life suppressing it, terrified of what it might reveal. Because people like her did not carry power. People like her carried consequences. The guards removed her cuffs. Pain lanced through her wrists as the moonsteel released its grip. She stumbled toward the throne, every eye in the chamber fixed on her like she was prey and predator and sacrifice all at once. The throne waited. Silent, patient. She placed both hands on the armrests. Heat surged through her palms, immediate and overwhelming. The transformation hit like lightning, tearing her apart from the inside. Agony ripped through muscle and bone. Her vision whited out. Her scream shattered the air. And then she was not Serenya anymore. She was fire. She was fury. She was something the Empire had forgotten could exist. The wolf stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder. Its body was forged from living flame, crimson and gold and molten white. Every muscle wrapped in fire that did not burn but blazed with the intensity of a collapsing star. Its eyes glowed like twin suns. Its breath scorched the air. Heat rolled through the chamber in waves. Nobles scrambled backward. Guards drew weapons they knew would be useless. And the Ember Throne erupted. Silver fire climbed the obsidian, spreading across the dais, racing up the pillars, igniting ancient sigils carved into stone 300 years ago. The dome filled with light so bright it hurt to look at. The wolf did not move. It simply stood there, radiating power that felt older than the Empire, older than the throne, older than every bloodline in that room combined. Silence crashed down like a hammer. Then Veressa's voice, shrill and desperate. Corruption! Look at it! That is not purity. That is monstrosity. But the regents were not looking at the wolf. They were looking at the throne, at the flames that had not burned this bright and living memory, at the prophecy carving itself into reality, whether they believed in it or not. The lead regent's face had gone pale. The throne has spoken, he whispered. No! Veressa stood, her composure finally shattering. No, this is wrong. This is impossible. She is nothing. She is no one. Her voice echoed through the dome, and in that echo, everyone heard the truth. Veressa was not defending the Empire. She was defending herself, defending the lie she had built her entire identity around. That power belonged to those who were born to it. That destiny followed bloodlines. That the throne would never, ever choose someone like Serenya Vale. But it had, and there was no taking it back. The wolf's eyes fixed on Veressa, and Veressa, for the first time in her life, understood what it felt like to be prey. The transformation reversed. Serenya collapsed to her knees, gasping, her body shaking from the effort of holding that much power inside mortal flesh. The throne's flames dimmed, but did not die. The regents stared at her like she had just rewritten history in front of them. Then the chamber doors slammed open. Every head turned. A figure stood silhouetted against the morning light, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in a black cloak that moved like smoke. Emperor Kaelen Draven had returned, and the Empire held its breath. Because when an emperor walks into a room where prophecy just shattered every rule, someone is about to burn. The question was who? Kaelen Draven did not walk into rooms. He conquered them. The emperor moved through the tribunal chamber like a storm given human form, his black cloak cutting the air behind him, his boots striking marble with the rhythm of inevitability. He was taller than most men, built from years of combat and political warfare that had taught him the difference between surviving and dominating. He had chosen domination, every time. His face carried the kind of beauty that made people nervous. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from stone, eyes the color of winter steel that missed nothing and forgave less. Scars traced his knuckles and disappeared beneath his collar, marks from battles he had won by refusing to stay down when lesser men would have surrendered. The Empire had tried to break him a dozen times. It had failed. Now it feared him. The regents rose from their seats like they had been caught stealing. "Your Majesty," the lead regent stammered, "we did not expect your return until—" Kaelen's voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. "What is happening here?" Not a question. A command dressed as inquiry. The regent's mouth opened and closed. "Your Majesty, there has been an incident. The Ember Throne has awakened under unusual circumstances. We convened the tribunal to determine— Who is she?" Kaelen was not looking at the regent. He was looking at Serenya. She knelt on the marble, still trembling from the transformation, her clothes scorched at the edges, her hair wild around her face. She looked small, fragile, like something the world had tried to erase but could not quite finish. Her eyes met his, and Kaelen felt something inside his chest shift. Not attraction. Not yet. Recognition. The kind that happened between predators who had learned to hunt alone because no one else could keep pace. The kind that whispered, "Here is someone who understands what it costs to survive when survival should have been impossible." Veressa stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Your Majesty, this girl is a servant who has tampered with sacred relics. She touched the Ember Throne without authority and— Did the throne accept her?" Veressa froze. Kaelen's gaze had not left Serenya. "Did the throne accept her?" he repeated, his voice low and laced with something that sounded like warning. The lead regent cleared his throat. "The throne did respond, Your Majesty, with considerable force. However, the question of legitimacy remains." "There is no question." The words dropped into the chamber like stones into deep water. Kaelen moved toward the throne, his steps measured, his presence filling the space until it felt like the room had shrunk around him. He stopped 3 feet from Serenya and looked down at her with an expression that gave nothing away. "Stand up." Serenya's legs barely held her. She rose on shaking knees, her breath coming too fast, her pulse hammering in her throat. She had heard stories about Emperor Kaelen Draven. Everyone had. Stories about his brutality in war, his ruthlessness in politics, the way he dismantled enemies so completely that even their names disappeared from history. He was the Empire's apex predator, and she was standing in front of him covered in ash and exhaustion. "What is your name?" he said. "Serenya Vale." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Kaelen studied her face like he was reading a battle map. "How long have you served in this palace?" 18 years. "And in those 18 years, did you ever approach the throne before last night?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I was not allowed." "Who told you that?" Serenya's throat tightened. "Everyone." Kaelen's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like understanding. He turned to face the tribunal. "The Ember Throne has not responded to anyone in 3 decades. It sat cold through coronations, ceremonies, and 100 noblewomen who believed bloodline guaranteed destiny. Yet it awakened for a servant girl who fell by accident." He let the words settle. "Either the throne has been corrupted, which would mean our entire imperial foundation is built on fraud, or prophecy does not care about your expectations." Veressa's voice shook with barely controlled fury. "Your Majesty, you cannot possibly believe—" "I believe what I see," Kaelen said, "and I see a throne that chose someone you did not expect. That terrifies you, Lady Veressa, and fear makes people dangerous." Veressa's face went pale. "This is not about fear," she said. "This is about protecting sacred traditions from what?" Kaelen's voice dropped to something cold and lethal. From change, from uncertainty, from the possibility that power does not belong to those who inherit it, but to those strong enough to hold it. He stepped closer to Veressa until she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You wanted the throne because you were promised it. You were raised to expect it. And when it rejected you, you decided the problem was not your inadequacy, but her existence. The words hit like physical blows. Varessa's hands clenched into fists at her sides. I have dedicated my entire life to serving this empire, she said through gritted teeth. I have trained in politics, warfare, strategy. I have studied prophecy and history and law. And you would hand power to a girl who has done nothing but pour wine? Kaelen's smile was colder than winter. The throne already handed it to her. I am simply acknowledging reality. He turned back to the regents. The law is clear. The Flame Sovereign is sacred, second only to the Emperor, equal in authority over imperial matters. The lead regent looked like he had swallowed glass. Your Majesty, surely you do not intend to— I intend to follow the law, Kaelen said, unless you are suggesting we ignore it when it becomes inconvenient. Silence crashed through the chamber. Then Kaelen did something no one expected. He descended from the dais, and he knelt in front of Serenya. The room exploded into shocked murmurs. Emperors did not kneel. Not for anyone. Not ever. Kaelen's voice carried across the silence. Ancient law declares the Flame Sovereign equal to the crown. I acknowledge Serenya Vale as the rightful bearer of that title. Serenya stared down at him, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This was not submission. This was strategy. Kaelen was forcing the Empire to choose, accept prophecy or reject their own laws. Either way, he won. Either way, he controlled the narrative. But there was something else in his eyes, something that looked like curiosity, like he had found something unexpected and was trying to decide whether to protect it or test it. He rose to his feet. Serenya Vale will reside in the Imperial Wing under my protection until her formal investiture. Anyone who harms her answers to me personally. Varessa's voice came out strangled. Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. Try me. 2 words, delivered with the kind of quiet violence that ended arguments before they started. Varessa's mouth snapped shut. Kaelen turned to Serenya. Come with me. It was not a request. Serenya followed him out of the tribunal chamber on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Behind them, the court erupted into chaos. But Kaelen did not look back. He never looked back. Looking back was for people who doubted their choices. And doubt was a luxury emperors could not afford. The Imperial Wing was a different world. Where the servant quarters were stone and shadows, this place was light and gold and suffocating opulence. Tapestries hung from walls depicting conquests and coronations. Chandeliers dripped crystal. Every surface gleamed like it had been polished by people whose names no one remembered. Serenya walked 3 steps behind Kaelen because that was where servants belonged. He stopped. Walk beside me. She hesitated. That was not how things worked. Emperors walked ahead, everyone else followed. That was the order of the world, the hierarchy that kept the empire from collapsing into chaos. Now, he said. Serenya stepped forward. They walked side by side through corridors that smelled like incense and power. Kaelen's voice was quiet. You are afraid. It was not a question. Yes, Serenya said. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. It is the people who are not afraid that get themselves killed. They reached a set of doors carved with symbols Serenya did not recognize. Kaelen pushed them open. The chamber beyond was vast. Windows overlooked the cliffs of the Black Meridian, where the ocean smashed itself against rock in endless, futile violence. A desk sat near the window, covered in maps and reports. Weapons hung on the walls. A fireplace large enough to burn bodies dominated one corner. This was not a bedroom. This was a war room. You will stay here, Kaelen said. No one enters without my permission. Serenya turned to face him. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Protecting me. Acknowledging me. You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Kaelen walked to the window and looked out at the cliffs. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke without turning around. I became emperor at 16, he said. My father died in an ambush. My mother was poisoned 3 months later. I had 5 older cousins who thought the throne should have been theirs. They tried to kill me 7 times in the first year. His voice was calm, detached, like he was describing someone else's life. I learned early that the Empire does not care about fairness. It cares about strength. And strength is not something you are born with. It is something you take from every person who tries to break you. He turned to face her. You survived 18 years invisible. That takes a different kind of strength, the kind most nobles will never understand because they have never had to disappear to stay alive. Serenya's throat tightened. Kaelen stepped closer. The throne chose you because you earned it, not through bloodline, through endurance, and the Empire is going to fight you for it because nothing terrifies power more than proof that it can be taken. He was close enough now that she could see the scars on his knuckles, the exhaustion hidden beneath his composure, the weight he carried that no crown could balance. I am not protecting you out of kindness, he said. I am protecting you because watching you survive is going to teach this court a lesson they desperately need. What lesson? That destiny does not ask permission. The words hung between them. Then Kaelen stepped back. Rest. Eat. The servants will bring you whatever you need. Tomorrow we begin preparing for your investiture. He moved toward the door. Serenya's voice stopped him. What happens if I fail? Kaelen paused in the doorway. You will not fail. How do you know? Because, he said, people who survive what you survived do not know how to fail. They only know how to adapt. He left without waiting for a response. The door closed behind him with a sound like finality. Serenya stood alone in a room larger than anywhere she had ever slept and felt the full weight of what had just happened settle onto her shoulders. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer safe. And there was no going back. 3 days passed like a fever dream. Servants came and went, bringing food. Serenya did not eat, clothes she did not recognize, and instructions she barely understood. She was measured for gowns, taught how to stand, how to walk, how to hold her chin at an angle that suggested authority without arrogance. It felt like being rebuilt, like someone was taking the person she had been and carving her into something the Empire could stomach. Kaelen appeared each evening, not to teach her, to test her. He asked questions that felt like traps. What would you do if the outer provinces rebelled? How would you handle a noble house that refused to acknowledge your authority? If you had to choose between justice and stability, which would you pick? Serenya answered honestly. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he said nothing. Once he almost smiled. That was worse than approval, because it meant he was starting to see her as something other than a political asset. And assets were easier to sacrifice than people. On the 4th night, he brought her to the eastern tower. The room was circular, lined with bookshelves that climbed toward a domed ceiling painted with constellations. A single chair sat near the window. No desk, no ornamentation, just silence and starlight. This is where I come when the crown gets too heavy, Kaelen said. He gestured for her to sit. She did. He remained standing, looking out at the Empire sprawled below them like a beast pretending to sleep. Do you know what the worst part of ruling is? He said. Serenya shook her head. Loneliness. The word landed quiet and final. Kaelen's voice was softer now, stripped of the imperial weight he carried everywhere else. People think emperors are surrounded by allies, advisors, companions. But everyone wants something. Everyone has an agenda. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every smile hides calculation. He turned to face her. I have not had a conversation without subtext in 10 years. Serenya met his eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because you are the first person in this palace who did not ask to be here. You did not scheme for power. You did not manipulate prophecy. You fell. And the throne chose you anyway. He stepped closer. That makes you dangerous, not to me. To the lies this empire tells itself. What lies? That power is earned through birthright, that destiny follows bloodlines, that the people at the top deserve to be there. Kaelen's smile was bitter. You are proof that none of that is true, and proof is the most dangerous thing in the world. Serenya's pulse quickened. There was something happening here, something beneath the politics and strategy, something raw. You could have ignored the throne, she said. You could have declared it corrupted, executed me quietly. No one would have questioned you. Kaelen's eyes darkened. I know. Then why did you not? Silence stretched between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Because I am tired of pretending. Pretending what? That I do not want something real. The words hit like lightning. Serenya's breath caught. Kaelen looked at her like he was seeing past every defense she had built, every mask she had worn, straight down to the part of her that was still terrified and exhausted and desperate to believe someone saw her as more than a servant or a prophecy or a political problem. I have ruled alone for a decade, he said. I have rejected every noble alliance, every strategic marriage, every convenient partnership because none of them felt like anything except another negotiation. He stepped closer. And then you fell. And the throne burned. And for the first time in 10 years, I looked at someone and thought, here's a person who might understand what it costs to survive at the top. Serenya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was not politics. This was something far more dangerous. You do not know me, she whispered. I know enough. Kaelen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. His fingers brushed her jaw, tilting her face toward the light. I know you spent 18 years invisible and still managed to survive. I know the throne chose you over every noble in that palace. I know you are terrified right now, but you are still standing. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. And I know that when you transformed, you did not become something small. You became something immense. Serenya's breath came shallow and fast. Why does that matter to you? Because, Kaelen said, emperors do not get to be small. We do not get to hide. We do not get to fold ourselves into corners and hope the world forgets we exist. His voice dropped to something almost vulnerable. And I have been looking for someone who understands that for a very long time. The space between them felt electric. Serenya knew she should step back, knew this was a line that once crossed could not be uncrossed. But she did not move, and neither did he. What are you asking me? She said. Kaelen's eyes held hers. I am asking you to stand beside me, not as a servant, not as a subject, as an equal. The word hung in the air like a vow. Serenya's voice came out barely audible. The Empire will never accept that. Then we will teach it to accept. How? By refusing to apologize for what we are. His hand slid to the back of her neck, his touch firm and steady and impossibly gentle. You are not a mistake, Serenya. You are not corruption. You are proof that power chooses those strong enough to hold it, and I will burn this empire to ash before I let them take that from you. The words were a promise and a threat, and something that felt dangerously close to devotion. Serenya looked up at him and saw the truth in his eyes. He was not asking for permission. He was asking for partnership, for someone to share the weight the crown demanded, for someone who understood that surviving at the summit meant sacrificing pieces of yourself you could never get back. And despite every logical reason to refuse, despite every instinct screaming that this was insane, Serenya heard herself say the word that would change everything. Yes. Kaelen's smile was slow and devastating. Then we are agreed. He kissed her, not like possession, like recognition, like two people who had been fighting alone finally realizing they did not have to. The kiss was fire and certainty and the kind of reckless honesty that only happened between people who had nothing left to lose. When they pulled apart, Kaelen's forehead rested against hers. The Empire is going to fight us, he said. I know. Varessa will not stop. I know. This will get worse before it gets better. I know. Kaelen's laugh was quiet and rough. Then let it get worse. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Tomorrow we announce the bond. Tomorrow the Empire learns that prophecy chose you. And tomorrow we start rewriting every rule they thought was sacred. Serenya's pulse raced. This was madness. This was rebellion disguised as destiny. This was a declaration of war against everyone who had spent their lives believing power belonged to them. And she was saying yes. What if we fail? She whispered. Kaelen's smile turned sharp. Then we fail spectacularly. He stepped back, his composure sliding into place like armor. Get some rest. Tomorrow changes everything. He moved toward the door. Serenya's voice stopped him one more time. Kaelen. He turned. Why do you really want this? His expression softened. Because I am tired of ruling alone. And you are the first person I have met who looks at the throne and does not see opportunity. You see burden, responsibility, cost. He paused. That is the difference between someone who wants power and someone who deserves it. Then he was gone. And Serenya stood alone in the tower, surrounded by stars and silence and the terrifying knowledge that she had just agreed to something that could not be undone. The announcement came at dawn. The entire court assembled in the Hall of Dominion, a space designed to make mortals feel insignificant beneath vaulted ceilings and banners from 100 conquered nations. Serenya stood beside Kaelen on the imperial dais, dressed in robes of silver and crimson that marked her as something the Empire had not seen in generations. Flame sovereign, equal to the crown, sacred and untouchable. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Kaelen spoke. His voice carried across marble and gold. Ancient law declares the flame sovereign sacred. The throne has chosen. I acknowledge Serenya Vale as my equal in authority and my companion in rule. Gasps rippled through the hall. Kaelen continued without pause. Furthermore, I claim the sacred bond. The room exploded. The sacred bond was legend, prophecy, a connection between Emperor and Flame Sovereign that granted unity of power and purpose. It had not been invoked in 300 years. Veressa stood near the front, her face a mask of controlled fury. "This is madness," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You cannot bond with a servant. You cannot elevate someone with no training, no bloodline, no—" "I can," Kaelen said, "and I have." He turned to Serenya, and in front of the entire empire, he took her hand. The bond ignited. Silver fire erupted between their palms, spreading up their arms, wrapping around them like living light. The hall filled with heat and brilliance, and every single person watching understood. This was not political maneuvering. This was destiny carving itself into history. When the light faded, Kaelen and Serenya stood side by side, their hands still joined, their eyes locked. "The Empire will witness our union in 7 days," Kaelen said. "Until then, anyone who threatens the Flame Sovereign threatens the crown itself." He looked directly at Veressa. "Choose your next move carefully, Lady Veressa, because there will not be a third chance." Veressa's face had gone white, but her eyes burned with something cold and lethal. She bowed. Too deep. Too perfect. The bow of someone who had just declared war but was willing to wait for the right moment to strike. Kaelen saw it. So did Serenya. But there was no turning back now. The vows had been spoken. The bond had been claimed. And the Empire was watching. 7 days until the wedding. 7 days until everything either solidified or shattered. And in the shadows of the court, Veressa smiled. Because 7 days was more than enough time to destroy a prophecy. The palace never slept. It merely pretended. Beneath silk and ceremony, beneath vows spoken in daylight and promises whispered in shadow, the Empire churned with ambition that did not rest, did not forgive, and certainly did not accept disruption without retaliation. Veressa Dorn understood this better than most. She had spent her entire life learning the language of power, the grammar of influence, the syntax of survival at the summit where one misstep meant erasure. And she had just watched a servant girl claim everything that should have been hers. Not through skill, not through strategy, through accident. The injustice of it burned hotter than any flame the throne could conjure. She stood in her private chambers 3 days after the announcement, surrounded by silence and fury, staring at her reflection in polished silver. The woman looking back at her was flawless. Perfect posture, perfect composure, perfect control. But beneath the surface, something had cracked. And cracks, when left untended, became fractures. Fractures became collapse. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she said. The door opened to reveal Lord Matthias Crane, a man whose wealth came from weapons manufacturing and whose loyalty went to whoever paid the highest price. He was older, gray at the temples, with eyes like a shark, flat, calculating, and always searching for blood in the water. He bowed just deep enough to show respect without suggesting subservience. Lady Veressa, Lord Crane. She did not offer him a seat. He did not expect one. "I assume you have news," she said. Crane's smile was thin. "The Emperor has accelerated the wedding timeline. 5 days now instead of 7. Veressa's jaw tightened, but her expression remained smooth. "Of course he has. He knows the longer he waits, the more time we have to organize resistance." Crane clasped his hands behind his back. "Resistance may not be enough. The bond has been claimed. The court witnessed it. Prophecy or not, Kaelen has made his position clear. Then we change the position." "How?" Veressa turned to face him fully. "By making the Empire question whether prophecy can be trusted at all." Crane's eyes narrowed. "You want to discredit the throne itself." "No, I want to discredit her." She moved to the window overlooking the training yards where soldiers drilled in formations that had conquered kingdoms. Power, she had learned, was not about being right. It was about controlling the narrative. And narratives could be rewritten. The throne responded to her, Varessa said quietly. That is fact. But why it responded is still open to interpretation. Crane tilted his head. You are suggesting corruption again. The tribunal already rejected that claim, because they were looking for the wrong kind of corruption. Varessa's smile was cold and precise. What if the problem is not that she manipulated the throne, but that the throne itself has been compromised? What if something ancient and malevolent has been sleeping beneath the palace, waiting for someone weak enough to possess? She let the words settle. Crane's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. You want to frame her as a vessel for something dark. I want to give the Empire a reason to fear her. Fear is more powerful than prophecy. And once fear takes root, even emperors start questioning their choices. Crane was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. What do you need? Varessa's eyes glittered. Access to the Archive of Shadows, and a very specific kind of witness. The Archive of Shadows sat beneath the palace like a secret the Empire had tried to bury and failed. It was not a library. It was a tomb for forbidden knowledge. Books bound in leather that might have been human skin. Scrolls written in languages that predated the Empire by centuries. Artifacts sealed in cases marked with warnings no one alive could read anymore. The air down here tasted like dust and dread. Varessa descended the stone steps with a lamp in one hand and certainty in her heart. She had been here once before, years ago, when her tutors thought exposing her to darkness would teach her to fear it. They had been wrong. Darkness was just another tool, and tools existed to be used. She found what she was looking for in the Eastern Vault, a tome wrapped in chains, its cover marked with symbols that seemed to writhe in the lamplight. The title had been scratched out, but the index remained. Rituals of Transference, Possession through Sacred Flame, the Corruption of Prophecy. Perfect. She did not need the rituals to be real, she just needed them to be believable. Varessa carefully copied passages onto parchment, her handwriting deliberate and steady. Then she returned the tome to its shelf and left the archive as silently as she had entered. By dawn, 3 different servants would discover the copied pages in places they should not be. By midday, whispers would spread through the palace like plague. By evening, doubt would take root. And doubt, once planted, was almost impossible to kill. Because the thing about power was this: it did not matter what was true. It mattered what people believed, and belief could be engineered. Serenya woke to sunlight cutting through the windows of her new chambers and the uncomfortable awareness that she still did not belong here. 5 days. 5 days until she stood before the Empire and claimed a title she had never wanted, beside a man she barely knew, in front of people who would celebrate the union while secretly planning her destruction. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt inevitable, like watching a storm approach and knowing there was nowhere left to run. She dressed in the clothing servants had left, a gown of deep crimson edged with silver that probably cost more than her entire childhood. The fabric felt wrong against her skin, too soft, too fine, like wearing someone else's life. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Kaelen entered without ceremony. He looked like he had not slept. His hair was slightly disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his eyes carrying the weight of a man who had spent the night making decisions that would reshape the future whether anyone liked it or not. But when he looked at her, something in his expression softened. "How are you holding up?" he said. Serenya almost laughed. Honestly, I feel like I am standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground keeps crumbling beneath my feet." Kaelen crossed the room and stood in front of her. "Then we fall together." The words should have sounded reckless. Instead, they sounded like the only honest thing anyone had said to her in days. Kaelen reached out and took her hand. "I know this is happening fast. I know you did not ask for any of this. But the moment the throne chose you, the clock started. We either move forward or we let the court tear you apart while they debate legitimacy." Serenya met his eyes. "You could have let them." Kaelen's grip tightened slightly. "No, I could not." "Why?" "Because I meant what I said. I am tired of ruling alone. And you are the first person I have met who understands that power is not a gift. It is a sentence. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. 5 more days. Then we rewrite the rules. Together. Serenya wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that this was real, that she was not just a political maneuver, that destiny had actually chosen her instead of simply tripping over her in the dark. But belief was a luxury she had never been able to afford. What happens if the court refuses to accept this? She said. Kaelen's smile was grim. Then we remind them that acceptance is optional, but obedience is not. Before she could respond, the door burst open. A guard stood in the threshold, his face pale. Your Majesty, there has been an incident. Kaelen's entire demeanor shifted. What kind of incident? The guard swallowed hard. One of the high priests has collapsed during morning rites. He is claiming the flame sovereign is cursed. Silence dropped like a hammer. Serenya's stomach twisted. Kaelen's voice went cold. Where is he now? The infirmary. He is demanding an audience with the tribunal. Kaelen's jaw clenched. Then he turned to Serenya. Stay here. Do not leave this room. Do not speak to anyone. What is happening? She said. Kaelen's eyes were hard. Someone is making a move, and they are using fear to do it. He left without another word, and Serenya stood alone in her gilded cage, feeling the ground beneath her crumble a little faster. The infirmary smelled like herbs and panic. High Priest Draven lay on a cot, his skin slick with sweat, his eyes wild. He was old, brittle, the kind of man who had spent so long interpreting prophecy that he had started to believe he controlled it. Kaelen entered with 2 guards flanking him. The priest's gaze snapped to him immediately. Your Majesty, Draven rasped, thank the ancient powers you have come. I have seen the truth. I have witnessed the corruption. Kaelen's voice was flat. Explain. Draven sat up with trembling hands. Last night I performed the ritual of clarification. I sought guidance from the flames, and they showed me horror. He pointed a shaking finger toward the door as if Serenya stood there. That girl is not the flame sovereign. She is a vessel. Something dark has taken root inside her, something that will consume the Empire if we do not act. Kaelen did not move. What did you see? Fire that burned black, eyes that reflected nothing, a beast not of prophecy but of destruction. The priest's voice rose. She must be cleansed, purified, or destroyed before the corruption spreads. Kaelen stared at him for a long, cold moment. Then he spoke with the kind of calm that preceded violence. Who put you up to this? Draven's face went white. Your Majesty, I swear on the sacred texts I am telling the truth. You're telling a story someone paid you to tell. Kaelen stepped closer. And I am going to give you one chance to name them before I have you arrested for treason. Draven's mouth opened and closed. Fear flickered across his face. Then he made a choice. The wrong one. I speak only what the flames revealed, he said. If you do not believe me, then you are as blind as she is cursed. Kaelen's expression did not change. He turned to the guards. Arrest him. Treason against the crown and conspiracy to undermine imperial law. The guards moved immediately. Draven started screaming. You cannot silence the truth. The Empire will see. They will know what she is. Kaelen walked out while the priest's shouts echoed behind him, but the damage was done. By the time Kaelen returned to the Imperial wing, the whispers had already started. Servants murmured in corners. Nobles exchanged glances. Guards shifted uneasily at their posts. Doubt spread faster than fire. And doubt, in an empire built on certainty, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Kaelen found Serenya exactly where he had left her. She stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the cliffs. She did not turn when he entered. They are saying I am cursed, she said quietly. Kaelen crossed the room. One priest made an accusation. That does not make it true. It does not have to be true. It just has to sound convincing. She finally turned to face him. Her eyes were tired. This is not going to work, Kaelen. The Empire does not want me. They want someone like Veressa. Someone who looks the part. Someone who fits their story. Kaelen's voice was firm. I do not care what they want. You should. Because in 5 days, when we stand before them, they are going to be looking for any reason to reject this bond. And now someone has given them one. Kaelen stepped closer. So we give them a reason to accept it. How? By proving that you are exactly what prophecy intended. Serenya's laugh was bitter. And how do we prove that? By transforming again. By showing them the fire that terrifies them. Yes. The word landed heavy. Serenya stared at him. You want me to scare them into submission. I want you to remind them that power does not ask for approval. Kaelen's hands framed her face. You are not cursed, Serenya. You are not corrupted. You are something this empire has not seen in generations. Proof that destiny does not belong to bloodlines. His voice dropped. And if they cannot accept that, then we make them fear the alternative. Serenya looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. He was not protecting her. He was weaponizing her. And the worst part was she understood why. Because in an empire where fear was currency, the only way to survive was to become the thing others feared most. The question was whether she could live with what that would cost. Before she could answer, the door opened again. This time it was Lady Cerys, her expression grave. Your Majesty, the tribunal has convened an emergency session. They are demanding the Flame Sovereign appear before them to answer accusations of corruption. Kaelen's eyes went cold. They have no authority to demand anything. Cerys' voice was careful. 3 High Lords have joined the call. They are invoking the right of inquiry. Kaelen's jaw tightened. The right of inquiry was ancient law. It allowed the court to question anyone, including the Emperor, if enough noble houses called for it. It had not been used in 50 years. When? Kaelen said. Tonight. In the Hall of Judgment. Kaelen did not look at Serenya. He did not have to. They both knew what this was. A trap. And they were walking straight into it. The Hall of Judgment was designed to break people. High stone walls, no windows, torches that cast shadows sharp enough to cut. At the center of the room sat a single chair, isolated, exposed, surrounded on all sides by the tribunal and the gathered lords who had called for this inquiry. Serenya sat in that chair and felt every eye in the room dissecting her. She wore the crimson gown, the silver crown that marked her as Flame Sovereign, the composure Kaelen had taught her to wear like armor. But inside, she was still the girl who had scrubbed floors and poured wine and learned to disappear. And disappearing was not an option anymore. The lead regent stood. Serenya Vale. You have been summoned to answer accusations that you are not the true Flame Sovereign, but rather a vessel for corruption that threatens the Empire. Serenya's voice came out steady. I have answered these accusations before. New evidence has emerged. The regent gestured. A servant brought forward the copied pages from the Archive of Shadows. Serenya's stomach dropped. These texts describe possession through sacred flame, the regent said. Rituals that allow dark forces to inhabit a host and manipulate prophecy. He looked directly at her. Do you deny that the throne's response was unusual? That flames of such intensity have not been seen in generations? That your transformation produced a beast of fire rather than the traditional forms recorded in history? Serenya's pulse hammered. The throne chose me. I did not manipulate it. Then prove it. The words came from Veressa. She stood among the lords, her expression serene, her voice cutting. Transform now, before witnesses. Let us see if the beast that emerges is truly of prophecy or of something darker. Serenya's breath caught. Kaelen stood from his seat on the dais. This is a violation of protocol. The Flame Sovereign does not answer to accusations built on fear and fabricated evidence. Lord Crane stepped forward. With respect, Your Majesty, the Empire has a right to certainty. If the Flame Sovereign is pure, she has nothing to fear from transparency. Other voices joined in. A chorus of agreement, a tide of suspicion. Kaelen's eyes met Serenya's across the room. She saw the calculation there, the impossible choice. Refuse and confirm their suspicions, transform and risk revealing something they could twist into proof of corruption. There was no winning move, only survival. Serenya stood. Fine, she said. I will transform. The room went silent. Kaelen's expression flickered with something that might have been concern, but it was too late to stop now. Serenya stepped away from the chair and closed her eyes. She reached for the fire inside her, the thing she had spent 18 years suppressing, the power that had always felt too big, too wild, too dangerous to release. And she let it free. The transformation tore through her. Pain, light, heat. The wolf erupted into existence, massive and burning, its eyes blazing like twin suns. The hall filled with heat. But this time something was different. The fire was not just crimson and gold, it was threaded with black. Veins of shadow running through the flames like infection. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Varessa's voice rang out. You see? Corruption. The prophecy has been poisoned. Serenya's mind screamed in denial. She had not done this. She had not touched dark magic. This was impossible. But the evidence burned in front of every witness, and belief did not care about truth. The wolf's form flickered. Serenya struggled to hold the transformation, but something was wrong. Something was fighting her from the inside, twisting the fire into shapes that felt foreign and malicious. Then she understood. Someone had poisoned her, not with herbs or toxins, with magic. The realization hit like a blade between the ribs. She forced the transformation to reverse, collapsing back into human form on the cold stone floor. Silence. Then the regent's voice, heavy with finality. The evidence is clear. The Flame Sovereign has been compromised. No, Kaelen said. His voice cut through the room like steel. This is sabotage. Prove it, Varessa said quietly. Kaelen turned on her. You did this. Varessa's smile was cold. I did nothing but reveal the truth. Kaelen stepped toward her, but guards moved to block his path. The tribunal spoke in unison. By the right of inquiry and the evidence presented, we find that Serenya Vale is unfit to hold the title of Flame Sovereign. The bond is void. The union is cancelled. Serenya's world collapsed. Kaelen's voice rose. You have no authority to void a sacred bond. We have every authority when corruption threatens the empire. The regent looked at Serenya with something that might have been pity. You will be held in isolation until the corruption can be cleansed. If cleansing is possible. Guards moved towards her. Kaelen drew his sword. The room exploded into chaos. Stand down, the regent shouted. Your Majesty, if you defend her now, you defend corruption. You risk civil war. Kaelen's blade did not waver. Then let there be war. But Serenya's voice stopped him. No. Kaelen turned to look at her. She stood, trembling, exhausted, but her eyes were clear. If you fight for me now, they will call you compromised too. They will say the corruption has spread, and the empire will tear itself apart. Kaelen's expression shattered. I will not abandon you. You are not abandoning me. You are giving me time to prove the truth. She met his gaze. Trust me. The words hung between them. Kaelen's sword lowered. The guards took Serenya by the arms, and as they led her from the Hall of Judgment, Varessa's smile widened, because she had just done what no one thought possible. She had broken prophecy, destroyed a bond, and reduced the Flame Sovereign to a prisoner, all without spilling a single drop of blood. Power, she had learned, was not about strength. It was about knowing exactly where to press until everything collapsed. And watching Serenya disappear into the darkness, Varessa felt something close to triumph. But triumph, in an empire built on betrayal, never lasted. Because the thing about breaking prophecy was this. Sometimes, when you shattered the rules, you did not just destroy your enemy, you freed them. The isolation cells were not designed for comfort. They were designed to break you slowly. Stone walls that wept moisture in the darkness. A single barred window set too high to reach, letting in only thin slices of moonlight that did nothing to warm the cold. Silence so thick, it felt like drowning in deep water with no surface in sight. No bed, no blanket, just stone and shadows, and the slow erosion of certainty that came from being buried alive while your heart still beat. Serenya sat with her back against the wall and felt the poison working through her veins. Not the magical corruption they had accused her of. Real poison. Someone had dosed her before the trial. Something subtle enough that it would not kill her outright, but potent enough to twist her transformation into something monstrous when she called upon the fire. The brilliance of it made her sick with rage and grudging respect. Varessa had not just framed her, she had turned Serenya's own power into evidence of guilt. It was the kind of strategy that won wars before the first sword was drawn. Control the narrative. Poison the evidence. Make your enemy prove themselves guilty simply by existing. Hours passed in that cell, maybe days. Time became irrelevant when no one came to tell you whether you would live or die, whether the Empire had decided you were worth saving or easier to forget. Serenya's thoughts circled like vultures over a battlefield. Kaelen had lowered his sword. He had let them take her. And even though she understood why, even though she had asked him to stand down, part of her still felt the sting of abandonment like a blade between the ribs. Because understanding did not make betrayal hurt less. It just gave you someone to blame other than yourself. The thing about isolation was that it gave you too much time to think. Too much time to replay every moment, every decision, every word spoken in the heat of crisis. Too much time to wonder if trust was just another word for foolishness. Footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond her cell. Heavy boots on stone, purposeful, deliberate. Serenya looked up as a figure appeared beyond the bars. Not a guard. Kaelen. He stood in shadow, dressed entirely in black, his face carved from stone and fury. His eyes found hers in the darkness, and something in his expression made her breath catch. This was not the Emperor. This was the man beneath the crown, raw, dangerous, done with pretending. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried weight, questions, accusations, apologies that neither knew how to voice. Then Kaelen's voice came low and rough, like gravel scraped across steel. "I am getting you out of here." Serenya's laugh was bitter and broken. "And start a civil war." The tribunal made their position clear. Half the noble houses sided with them. If you break me out, you give them exactly the excuse they need to call you corrupted too. The tribunal can burn. Kaelen stepped closer to the bars, his hands wrapping around the iron. "I have spent 10 years playing by rules designed to keep the powerful comfortable and the rest of us in chains. 10 years smiling at men I wanted to gut. 10 years negotiating with women who would sell their own children for political advantage. I am done pretending those rules matter more than you do." His eyes burned with something beyond anger. Fury tempered into purpose. The kind of rage that did not explode outward but condensed inward until it became something dense and unstoppable. Serenya pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaking from days without proper food or rest. "If you break me out, they will call you a traitor," she said. "They will say the corruption spread to you. Every alliance you have built will collapse. Every treaty you signed will be questioned. The empire will tear itself apart. Then let it collapse." Kaelen's hands gripped the bars hard enough that his knuckles went white. "I told you I was tired of ruling alone. I meant it. And if the empire cannot accept that, if they cannot stomach the idea that prophecy does not follow their bloodlines and their expectations, then the empire needs to be reminded who holds the real power." His voice dropped to something almost tender. "Not them. Me. And now you." Serenya stepped closer until only iron separated them. "What are you planning?" "A reckoning." The word hung in the cold air like a blade waiting to fall. Kaelen's voice carried the weight of decisions already made, bridges already burned, lines already crossed in the dark hours while the Empire slept. "I know you were poisoned," he said. "I know Varessa orchestrated this entire performance, and I know exactly how to prove it." "How?" "By making her confess." Serenya's breath caught. She will never confess. She would rather die than admit she fabricated evidence. Kaelen's smile was cold and lethal and beautiful in its cruelty. She will when she has no other choice, when the alternative is worse than confession. When I back her into a corner so tight that the only way out is through the truth. He pulled a key from inside his coat. The metal gleamed in the thin moonlight. The lock clicked open with a sound like fate changing direction. Serenya stared at the door swinging wide, at the freedom that felt more like a trap than liberation, at the choice being offered that was not really a choice at all. "If I walk out of here, there is no going back," she said. "I know. If we do this, we are declaring war on everyone who sided against us, every noble who voted with the tribunal, every house that stayed silent, every coward who chose safety over truth." "I know." Serenya met his eyes and saw the truth there. He had already made peace with the cost, already counted the bodies this decision would create, already decided she was worth it. "Why are you willing to risk everything?" she whispered. Kaelen stepped into the cell and closed the distance between them in 2 strides. "Because the moment I knelt before you in that tribunal chamber, I stopped being just an emperor. I became something more dangerous." "What?" "A man who found something worth burning the world to protect." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "And I will raise this empire to ash before I let them take you from me." The words were a vow and a threat and a confession all wrapped into one. Serenya's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. This was madness. This was rebellion dressed as romance. This was choosing each other over an empire that would never forgive them and probably should not. "Then let it burn," she whispered. Kaelen's kiss was fierce and desperate and tasted like the beginning of war. His mouth claimed hers with the kind of hunger that came from days of restraint finally breaking. His hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers dug into his shoulders. They kissed like drowning people reaching for air, like soldiers before a battle they might not survive, like two people who had spent too long pretending they did not need this. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in the space between. "We have 3 hours before the changing of the guard," Kaelen said. "By then, we need to be in the Archive of Shadows with evidence that will destroy Varessa's credibility completely. How do we get there without being seen?" Kaelen's smile turned sharp and dangerous. "We do not hide. We walk through the front door. And anyone who tries to stop us answers to me." He pulled back and drew his sword. The blade sang as it left the sheath. "Stay close." They moved through this palace like ghosts wearing crowns. Kaelen led the way with his blade drawn, his stride long and uncompromising, his presence filling every corridor they passed through. Serenya followed, still weak from the poison, still shaking from days of isolation, but fueled by something stronger than fear. Rage. Not the wild, destructive kind that burned everything, including yourself. The focused kind. The kind that came from being pushed past every breaking point and discovering you had not broken at all. You had transformed into something harder, something sharper, something that knew exactly where to cut. They encountered the first guard at the eastern corridor. He stepped into their path, young and uncertain, his hand moving toward his weapon, but not quite committing to the draw. "Stand aside," Kaelen said. His voice carried no anger, no heat, just absolute certainty. The guard hesitated, his eyes darting between the Emperor and the prisoner who was supposed to be locked away. "Your Majesty, the prisoner is not authorized to—" "She is not a prisoner. She is the Flame Sovereign. And if you do not move, I will move you." Kaelen's sword did not rise, did not need to. The threat was implicit in his stance, in his eyes, in the 10 years of ruthless rule that had taught the entire palace exactly what Emperor Kaelen Draven was capable of when pushed. The guard looked at Kaelen's sword, at the cold certainty in his eyes, at Serenya standing behind him with fire barely contained beneath her skin, her eyes burning with the kind of fury that came from being caged. He stepped aside. They passed without another word. 2 more guards at the next junction. Same calculation, same result. Because the thing about authority was this. It was not granted by titles or bloodlines or ancient laws written by dead men. It was taken by those willing to enforce it. And Kaelen had spent a decade learning how to make people believe he would follow through on every single threat he made, spoken or silent. The guards who hesitated saw something in his eyes that made them choose survival over duty. They reached the entrance to the Archive of Shadows without raising an alarm. Kaelen pulled the heavy door open and descended into darkness with Serenya at his side. The archive smelled the same as it had when Varessa visited days ago. Dust, dread, secrets that should have stayed buried beneath stone in centuries. The air down here tasted old, like breathing the exhalation of ghosts, like every book and scroll and forbidden text had been slowly rotting for so long that decay had become atmosphere. Kaelen moved through the stacks with the confidence of someone who had been here before, who knew exactly where the Empire hid its darkest knowledge. "What are we looking for?" Serenya said. "Proof." "Of what?" "That Varessa copied those texts herself, that she fabricated evidence, that everything the tribunal used against you came from her desperation, not your corruption." He stopped in front of a shelf marked with symbols Serenya did not recognize, ancient warnings written in languages that predated the Empire. The archive keeps records of everyone who enters, dates, times, what they accessed. The Empire does not trust anyone, not even its own nobles, so it tracks every single visit to this place. He pulled a leather-bound ledger from the shelf and flipped it open. His finger traced down the entries, years of visits compressed into neat rows of script, then stopped. "Here." He turned the book toward Serenya. There, in careful script that matched perfectly with samples Serenya had seen on official documents, was Varessa's name. The date matched 3 days before the trial, and beside it, a detailed list of the exact texts that had been used as evidence against Serenya. Proof. Raw and undeniable. Serenya's breath came faster. This proves she planted the evidence. It proves she accessed the material. But we need more than access. We need intent. We need to show she copied specific passages with the purpose of framing you. Kaelen set the ledger down and moved deeper into the archive, past shelves that groaned under the weight of forbidden knowledge. He stopped in front of a case containing a book wrapped in chains, its cover marked with symbols that seemed to writhe in the lamplight. The same book Veressa had copied from. Kaelen broke the seal with a sharp twist and opened it carefully, his movements precise despite the urgency thrumming through both of them. Inside, recent disturbances in the dust showed exactly which pages had been touched, which passages had been read, which words had been stolen. He pulled a piece of parchment from inside his coat. The copied text the tribunal had presented as evidence. Line by line, word by word, it matched perfectly. Kaelen's smile was grim and satisfied. She was sloppy, arrogant. She thought no one would check because no one ever checks the powerful. They trust that nobility means honesty. Because no one ever checks the powerful, Serenya said quietly. They assume guilt only lives in people like me. Until now. Kaelen gathered the evidence with careful hands, treating each piece like the weapon it would become. Then footsteps echoed from the entrance above. Multiple boots, multiple guards descending. Someone had noticed their absence. Someone had sounded an alarm. "We need to move," Kaelen said. They climbed the stairs and emerged into a corridor filled with armed soldiers, at least 20 of them, blocking every exit. At their head stood Lord Crane, his expression cold and calculating, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "Your Majesty, step away from the prisoner." Kaelen's sword came up smoothly, the blade catching torchlight. "She is not a prisoner. The tribunal decreed." "The tribunal was lied to, and I have proof." Kaelen held up the ledger and the copied text, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a man who had ruled an empire through assassination attempts, rebellions, and political betrayals that would have broken lesser rulers. Lady Veressa Dorn fabricated evidence to destroy the Flame Sovereign. She accessed the archive of shadows. She copied forbidden texts. She poisoned Serenya to twist her transformation. She manipulated sacred law for personal vengeance. Crane's face remained neutral, but his eyes flickered with something that might have been doubt. Those are serious accusations. They are facts. Documented, witnessed, undeniable. Then present them to the tribunal in the proper manner, through the proper channels. Following the proper. I am done with proper. Kaelen's voice cut through the corridor like a blade through silk. The Empire has spent too long protecting the guilty because they wear the right names and say the right words and bow at the right angles. Too long letting injustice hide behind procedure. That ends now. Crane's hand tightened on his sword. "Your Majesty, you are making a mistake that will cost you the loyalty of every house that sided with the tribunal." "Good. Then I will know exactly who my enemies are." Kaelen stepped forward. The soldiers shifted uneasily, torn between orders and the primal instinct that told them standing against an emperor in this mood was a good way to die. "You have a choice," Kaelen said, his voice dropping to something quieter, but infinitely more dangerous. "Stand aside and let justice happen, or stand against your emperor and prove that loyalty in this court is as hollow as I have always suspected." The soldiers looked at each other. At Crane, whose political maneuvering had made him wealthy but not beloved. At Kaelen, who had led them through wars and kept the empire from collapsing into chaos. At Serenya, standing beside the emperor with her chin raised and fire in her eyes. Then one by one, they lowered their weapons. Crane's face darkened with fury, and something that looked like fear. "You are all committing treason." "No," Kaelen said. "We are committing honesty, and if that is treason in this empire, then the empire deserves to burn." He moved past Crane without waiting for a response. The soldiers parted like water around stone, and Serenya followed, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, her hands shaking, but her spine straight. Because she had just witnessed something most people never saw in their entire lives, power choosing principle over preservation, authority wielded not for control but for justice, and it was terrifying and exhilarating and utterly reckless in equal measure. They burst into the Hall of Judgment like a storm breaking through stone walls. The tribunal was in session, nobles gathered in their finest clothing, Varessa seated among them looking serene and untouchable in a gown of midnight blue that made her look like royalty. Until Kaelen slammed the ledger onto the table hard enough to make goblets jump. The room went silent so fast it felt like the air had been sucked out. Evidence, Kaelen said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Proof that Lady Varessa Dorn accessed the Archive of Shadows 3 days before the trial. Proof that she copied forbidden texts. Proof that she used them to fabricate accusations against the Flame Sovereign. He spread the documents across the table, every eye in the room locked onto the evidence. Varessa's composure cracked for half a second, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she rebuilt the mask. Then she stood with fluid grace. "Accessing the archive is not a crime," she said smoothly. "I was researching protective rights, studying ancient texts to better understand the threat we faced." Her voice carried conviction, the practiced ease of someone who had spent years learning how to lie with truth wrapped around it. 3 days before the trial, Kaelen said, copying the exact passages used as evidence, researching the precise rituals you later claimed Serenya had performed. What a remarkable coincidence. He turned to face the tribunal directly. She poisoned Serenya Vale. She twisted her transformation into something monstrous and then claimed it was proof of corruption. She manipulated sacred law to destroy a woman whose only crime was being chosen by prophecy. Varessa's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but her voice remained steady. "These accusations are absurd. You have no proof of poisoning, only speculation built on desperation. Then explain this." Kaelen gestured to Serenya. "Transform, now. The poison has had time to work through your system. 3 days of isolation. 3 days for your body to purge whatever corruption was forced into it. Show them what you really are." Serenya's pulse hammered in her ears. She was still weak, still shaking, still terrified that the poison would twist her again, that she would become the monster they expected, that this gamble would backfire and prove Varessa right. But Kaelen's eyes held hers across the room. "Trust me," he had said in the cell. She had chosen to trust him then. She chose it again now, so... Serenya stepped into the center of the hall, into the space where accused criminals stood to receive judgment. Every noble leaned forward, every guard tensed. Varessa's smile was small and cold, like she had already won. Serenya closed her eyes and reached for the fire inside her, the thing she had spent 18 years suppressing, folding inward, hiding from the world because power in a servant was dangerous. And this time she did not suppress it, did not shrink, did not apologize. She let it consume her completely. The transformation ripped through her body like lightning tearing flesh, pain and light and heat erupting from somewhere deep in her chest. The wolf exploded into existence, massive, blazing, magnificent, 12 feet tall at the shoulder, every muscle wrapped in living flame, eyes glowing like twin suns, breath scorching the air into waves of heat that rolled across the chamber. But this time the flames were pure, crimson and gold and white, burning with an intensity that made the torches look like dying embers, that made the chandeliers seem dim by comparison. No black veins threading through the fire, no corruption twisting the light, no poison warping the transformation, just raw, undeniable power. The hall filled with light so bright it hurt to look at directly, and from somewhere deep in the palace, the Ember Throne responded. Silver fire erupting from ancient runes, racing through corridors, climbing walls, igniting every sacred symbol carved into stone 300 years ago. Every noble in that room felt it. The resonance, the truth. The prophecy carving itself into reality, whether they wanted to believe it or not. The wolf stood absolutely still, radiating heat and authority, its presence filling the chamber until it felt like the room had shrunk to nothing. Serenya held the form for 10 long seconds. Let them see. Let them witness. Let them understand that this was not corruption. This was destiny, accepting no substitutes. Then she reversed the transformation. The fire collapsed inward. The wolf dissolved. And Serenya stood on shaking legs in the center of the hall, gasping for breath, her body trembling from the effort of holding that much power inside mortal flesh. But her eyes burned with triumph. Silence crashed through the chamber like a physical weight. Then Kaelen's voice, cold and final, as a judge, pronouncing sentence. The poison has cleared. The truth is visible to anyone with eyes. Serenya Vale is the flame sovereign. The throne chose her. Prophecy claimed her, and anyone who continues to deny it is complicit in treason against the empire itself. Varessa's face had gone white as bone, but her eyes still burned with defiance, with fury, with the desperate rage of someone watching everything they had ever wanted slip through their fingers. "This proves nothing," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Transformations can be manipulated. The archive records could be forged. You have no witnesses to the poisoning." Kaelen stepped toward her with the slow, deliberate movements of a predator closing in. "Then let us settle this the old way." Varessa's breath caught. "Trial by combat," Kaelen said. "You accuse her of corruption. She accuses you of treason, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Let the flames decide which of you is telling the truth." The tribunal exchanged glances. Ancient law permitted trial by combat in cases where evidence conflicted and testimony contradicted. It had not been invoked in over a century, but it was still law, carved into the foundation of imperial justice. The lead regent spoke slowly, weighing each word. "If Lady Varessa accepts, the trial will proceed at dawn in the arena. Combat to yield or incapacity. The victor's claim will be accepted as truth." All eyes turned to Varessa. She stood trapped in a corner of her own making. Refuse and admit guilt by cowardice. Accept and face a woman who had just proven her power was real, whose transformation had shaken the palace itself. But Varessa had spent her entire life being told she was superior, that bloodline meant skill, that nobility guaranteed victory. Her smile returned, cold and sharp and utterly convinced. "I accept," because she had one more card to play, one final move that would end this permanently. She had spent 20 years training with the best swordmasters in the empire. Serenya had spent 20 years scrubbing floors. The outcome was inevitable. And as the tribunal adjourned, as nobles whispered and guards escorted Serenya back to her chambers under Kaelen's protection, Varessa disappeared into the shadows. She had hours until dawn, hours to make sure Serenya Vale never saw sunrise, hours to arrange an accident, a poisoning, a convenient tragedy that would solve this problem permanently. Because Varessa had learned long ago that rules only mattered when you could not afford to break them. And she could afford anything. Serenya sat in her chambers surrounded by silence and the weight of what was coming. Trial by combat, against a woman who had spent her entire life training for war while Serenya had been invisible. The odds were not in her favor. The door opened and Kaelen entered without knocking, moving with the kind of purpose that suggested he had been planning this for hours. He crossed the room and knelt in front of where she sat. "You do not have to do this," he said. "There are other ways. I can arrest her tonight on the evidence we have. Force a confession. End this without bloodshed." Serenya met his eyes. "No, there are not. There are always—" "No." Her voice was firm, cutting through his protest. "Varessa will not stop. Even if you arrest her, even if you exile her, she will find a way to come back. She will poison me again, frame me again. She will spend the rest of her life finding ways to destroy me because my existence shatters everything she was promised." She leaned forward. "The only way this ends is if I prove, beyond any doubt, that I deserve to be here. Not because prophecy chose me, not because you protected me, but because I fought for it and won." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "You have already proven that. Not to them, not to the Empire. They need to see me fight. They need to see me bleed. They need to see me standing over her with a blade at her throat and choosing mercy." She took his hands. "They need to see that I am not just powerful. I am strong enough to wield that power with wisdom. And if you lose, then I lose." Serenya's hands clenched into fists. "But I would rather die standing in that arena than live in a cell waiting for someone else to decide my fate. I spent 18 years being powerless. I am done." Kaelen stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Pride. Fear. Love twisted together into something complicated and fierce. Then he stood and pulled her to her feet. "Then we train. Now. You have hours to learn how to kill someone who has been preparing to kill you her entire life." "How do we possibly do that?" Kaelen's smile was grim and dangerous. "By teaching you that combat is not about strength or skill or training. It is about knowing where your opponent is weakest and striking before they see it coming. They spent the remaining hours in brutal preparation. Kaelen cleared furniture from the chamber and transformed it into a makeshift training ground. He taught her footwork, balance, how to read an opponent's weight shift before they moved, how to turn size disadvantage into speed advantage, how to use rage as fuel without letting it control her, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. He came at her again and again, his strikes controlled but real, forcing her to learn through pain and repetition. She stumbled, fell, got back up. Again. Her body ached. Her hands bled from gripping practice weapons. Her muscles screamed, but her eyes burned brighter with every fall. By the time dawn broke over the cliffs, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Serenya stood breathing hard, covered in sweat and small cuts, her body exhausted. But her eyes carried something new. Not confidence. Certainty. The kind that came from realizing you had already survived worse than this. And if you could survive being invisible for 18 years, being told you did not matter, being treated like furniture, you could survive 3 minutes in a combat circle. Because the hardest battles were not fought with swords. They were fought with silence and endurance and the daily choice to keep existing when the world wanted you erased. And she had won those battles every single day for 18 years. This was just the first time anyone would be watching. The arena was an open courtyard beneath the morning sky. No roof, no walls, just stone and sunlight, and the entire court gathered to watch. Hundreds of nobles in their finest clothing, guards lining the perimeter, the tribunal seated in judgment on a raised platform. Merchants and servants pressed against the outer edges, desperate to witness history. Serenya stood on one side wearing leather armor that felt foreign against her skin, lighter than she expected, fitted to her frame overnight by craftsmen who worked in fear and speed. Veressa stood opposite, dressed in black and silver armor that looked like it had been made for her years ago, perfectly fitted, perfectly maintained, a second skin she had worn in 100 training sessions. She held a blade in each hand, spinning them absently, her movements fluid and practiced. She looked like a warrior born. Serenya looked like a servant playing dress-up. The crowd murmured. Bets were placed. The odds heavily favored Veressa. Kaelen stood among the tribunal, his face unreadable, but his hands gripped the stone railing hard enough to turn his knuckles white. The lead regent stood and spoke in a voice that carried across the courtyard. This is trial by combat under ancient law. The accused and the accuser will fight until one yields or falls. The victor's claim will be accepted as truth by this tribunal and the empire. He paused, letting the weight settle. There will be no interference, no mercy unless offered by the victor. This ends when it ends. He raised his hand. Begin. Veressa moved first, fast, brutal, precise. Her blades flashed in the sunlight like silver lightning. Serenya barely blocked the first strike, the impact jarring her arms hard enough to send pain shooting up to her shoulders. Veressa pressed forward, relentless, her attacks coming in combinations Serenya could not predict, patterns burned into muscle memory through years of training. A slash across the ribs that Serenya twisted away from, but not fast enough. Leather parted. Blood bloomed. A cut along the shoulder that she blocked, but the blade still bit deep. More blood. A kick that sent Serenya stumbling backward, her feet struggling to find purchase on stone slick with morning dew. The crowd murmured louder. This was going exactly as expected. Veressa's smile widened, her eyes bright with triumph, already tasting victory. "You should have stayed invisible," she hissed between strikes. "You should have known your place. Servants serve, nobles rule. That is the order of the world." Serenya's breath came ragged. Pain screamed through her body from a dozen cuts. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. The fire, not the transformation, the rage that had kept her alive through 18 years of being treated like she did not matter, like she was furniture with a pulse, like her pain was background noise in someone else's story. Serenya's eyes met Veressa's, and she smiled through the blood. "My place is standing. Yours is about to be on the ground." She lunged, not with technique, not with the careful footwork Kaelen had taught her, with pure, focused fury. Her blade caught Veressa across the forearm. Blood sprayed across pristine armor. Veressa's eyes widened in genuine shock, because servants were not supposed to fight back. They were supposed to fold, to break, to disappear when pushed. But Serenya had spent her entire life disappearing, and she was done. She pressed forward, using every trick Kaelen had taught her, every advantage she could find. Varessa was stronger, faster, better trained, but Serenya was angrier, and anger, when focused, became something more dangerous than skill. It became refusal. Refusal to lose. Refusal to yield. Refusal to go back to being invisible. A slash across Varessa's thigh. A strike to the shoulder that made her stumble. A kick that sent her backward 3 steps. The tide shifted. The crowd gasped, the sound rolling through the arena like thunder. Varessa's composure shattered like glass. She attacked wildly now, desperately, her strikes losing the precision that came from control. Serenya blocked, dodged, countered, and with every exchange she felt herself transforming. Not into fire, into something more dangerous, a woman who had nothing left to lose. And nothing was more terrifying than that. Because people with everything to lose fought carefully. They protected, they calculated, they worried about tomorrow. People with nothing left to lose fought like the world was already ending. They just wanted to decide who burned with them. Their blades locked, faces inches apart, both bleeding, both gasping, both pushed past exhaustion into the realm where only will mattered. Varessa's voice came strangled with rage and desperation. You do not deserve this. You were born nothing. You will die nothing. Serenya's voice was cold as winter steel. Neither did you. You were just born lucky. But I earned this. And that is the difference between us. She twisted hard. Varessa's blade flew from her hand, clattering across stone 20 feet away. Serenya's sword pressed against her throat. Silence crashed through the courtyard like a physical force. Varessa stared up at her, blood running down her face from a cut above her eye. Her perfect armor dented and torn, her eyes filled with hatred and fear and the dawning realization that she had lost. That prophecy had been right, that destiny did not care about bloodlines. Yield, Serenya said, her voice carried across the silent arena. Never. Varessa's eyes burned with defiance even as her body trembled with exhaustion and pain. Then die. Serenya's blade pressed harder against skin. One more inch of pressure and it would be over. Varessa would bleed out on the stones, justice would be served. The Empire would witness that threatening the Flame Sovereign meant death. But Serenya stopped, because killing Varessa would not prove anything except that she could kill. And the Empire had enough killers. It needed something else. It needed proof that power could be tempered with wisdom, that strength did not always mean cruelty, that mercy was not weakness, but the hardest choice of all. She lowered the blade. I am not going to kill you, Serenya said, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena, because mercy is more powerful than execution, because I am not interested in revenge. I am interested in building something better than the empire that created us both. She stepped back. Varessa collapsed to the stone, gasping, her hands shaking as they touched her throat where the blade had pressed. Serenya turned to face the tribunal. I have won according to ancient law. The throne chose me and the flames proved it. I have defeated the woman who tried to destroy me, and I have chosen mercy when I could have chosen death. Her voice rang with authority earned through survival. Now the Empire will decide. Accept prophecy and everything it means. Or continue clinging to lies that protect the powerful and crush everyone else beneath tradition. She looked directly at Kaelen. I am done asking for permission to exist. The tribunal was silent, every regent frozen as they calculated political futures and weighed the cost of defying an emperor who had just proven he would tear the empire apart for this woman. Then the lead regent stood slowly. The trial has concluded. Serenya Vale has proven herself through combat. She is acknowledged as the true flame sovereign under ancient law and prophecy. Cheers erupted from parts of the crowd. The servants pressed against the outer edges shouted loudest, their voices carrying hope that maybe, just maybe, the empire could change. Stunned silence from the nobles, their faces tight with calculations already being made. Kaelen descended from the platform and crossed the courtyard with long, purposeful strides. He stopped in front of Serenya, blood-spattered and exhausted and more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. And he knelt, not in submission, in partnership, in recognition that she had just done something he never could. She had proven that power did not corrupt when wielded by those who understood its cost. "The Flame Sovereign has proven herself beyond doubt," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "And in 3 days, the Empire will witness our union. No more delays, no more challenges, no more doubt." He stood and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "We end this, together." Serenya's pulse raced. She had won the trial, but the war was just beginning. Because Varessa lay on the stone, broken and humiliated, her eyes promising that this was not over, that vengeance could wait, that mercy was a gift she would repay with a blade in the dark. And the Empire watched, divided, uncertain, teetering on the edge of civil war. The wedding would either unite them or destroy everything. And as Kaelen led Serenya from the arena, neither of them saw the shadow moving through the dispersing crowd. A figure cloaked in darkness, moving with purpose, carrying a blade meant for emperors, and a hatred deep enough to burn the world to ash. The palace did not sleep the night before the wedding, it calculated. In chambers lined with silk and gold, nobles gathered to whisper about alliances that might need renegotiating. In barracks where soldiers sharpened blades, men debated whether loyalty to an emperor extended to accepting his choice of empress. In servant quarters where oil lamps burned low, people who had spent their lives invisible dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, the world could be different. Hope was a dangerous thing in an empire built on certainty. It made people question whether the chains they wore were necessary or just convenient for those who held the keys. Serenya stood alone in her chambers, staring at the gown hanging before her. It was magnificent. Crimson silk that caught light like living fire. Silver embroidery depicting wolves and flames intertwined. A train that would trail behind her for 20 feet, heavy with the weight of prophecy and expectation. The kind of dress that transformed servants into empresses, if you believed transformation was possible. Her body still ached from the trial, cuts bandaged beneath her skin, bruises blooming purple and black across her ribs. Every breath reminded her of Varessa's blades, of how close death had come, of how thin the line was between victory and oblivion. She had won, but winning in the arena did not mean winning the empire. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she said. The door opened to reveal an older woman, gray-haired and steady-eyed, wearing the simple clothing of palace staff. Serenya recognized her vaguely from years of passing in corridors, both of them invisible to the people who mattered. The woman carried a wooden box. "I was asked to bring you this," she said quietly. "A gift from the Emperor." She set the box on the table and turned to leave. "Wait," Serenya said. "What is your name?" The woman paused, surprised to be asked. "Marin." "How long have you worked here, Marin?" 32 years. Serenya met her eyes. "Then you have seen empresses come and go, ceremonies and unions. What advice would you give me?" Marin was silent for a long moment, her weathered hands clasping together. Then she spoke with the careful honesty of someone who had spent decades learning which truths were safe to speak. "Do not let them make you into something you are not. The moment you start performing for them, you lose yourself. And a crown worn by someone who has forgotten who they are becomes a cage, not a symbol." The words settled into Serenya's chest like stones dropping into deep water. Marin bowed slightly and left without waiting for a response. Serenya opened the box. Inside lay a circlet of silver and flame-colored gemstones, delicate and fierce at once. And beneath it, a letter in Kaelen's sharp handwriting. "You do not need this crown to be powerful. You were powerful the moment you survived 18 years of being told you were nothing. Wear it tomorrow, not because the Empire demands it, but because you choose to. And if you ever want to take it off and walk away, I will walk with you." Serenya read the words 3 times, her throat tight. This was not a man trying to own her. This was a man offering partnership. The difference mattered more than all the gold in the Empire. She set the letter down and looked at the gown again. Tomorrow she would put it on. Tomorrow she would stand before the Empire and claim a title that still felt foreign. Tomorrow she would marry a man she barely knew but was starting to understand. But tonight she was still just Serenya, a girl who had survived by disappearing, learning, finally, how to be seen. Midnight found Kaelen in the eastern tower where he went when the weight of the crown became unbearable. The room was circular, lined with windows that overlooked the empire he had spent 10 years holding together through sheer will and strategic brutality. He stood with both hands pressed against cold glass, staring out at lights scattered across the city below. Fires and hearths, lanterns and windows. Lives being lived by people who would never know his name, never understand the decisions that kept them safe, never see the cost of the power they feared and relied upon in equal measure. Ruling was the loneliest thing he had ever done. You could be surrounded by thousands and still feel utterly alone because no one around you wanted the truth. They wanted the performance, the certainty, the illusion that someone was in control. And if you gave them honesty instead of illusion, they called it weakness. Footsteps approached from behind. Kaelen did not turn. He knew the rhythm of those steps, had memorized them over the past days as Serenya moved through the palace, learning how to occupy space she had spent 18 years avoiding. "You should be resting," he said. Serenya stopped beside him, looking out at the same view. "So should you." Her reflection appeared in the glass beside his. Two people who had survived by becoming what the Empire needed, finally daring to wonder if they could be something else. "Are you afraid?" Serenya asked quietly. Kaelin's smile was bitter, terrified. "Of what?" He turned to face her directly. "Of discovering that I have built my entire identity around ruling alone, and tomorrow I will have to learn how to share power with someone who might see through every defense I have built." His eyes held hers. "Of realizing that I am not as strong as I pretend to be. That without the crown and the throne and the fear, I am just a man who has been alone for so long he has forgotten how to trust anyone." Serenya's hand found his. Her fingers were smaller, rougher from years of work his hands had never known. "I am afraid too," she said. "Afraid that I will wake up and discover this was just a fever dream born from desperation. That the throne will reject me. That the Empire will find a way to erase me again." She squeezed his hand. "Afraid that I will let you down, that I do not know how to be what they need me to be." Kaelin's other hand came up to cup her face. "Then we will be afraid together." And maybe that is the point. Maybe the strongest partnerships are not built on certainty, but on two people terrified of failing each other and choosing to try anyway. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "Tomorrow, we stand before the Empire. But tonight, we can just be two people who have survived things that should have broken us." Serenya leaned into his touch. "What happens after tomorrow?" she whispered. Kaelin's smile was small and genuine. "We start building something better than what we inherited. We make the Empire face the fact that power does not belong to bloodlines. We fight everyone who tries to stop us, and we probably make a lot of enemies. Sounds exhausting. It will be. Worth it, though." Kaelen kissed her forehead. "Ask me again in a year." They stood together in the tower as midnight became early morning, as the Empire slept and dreamed and prepared for the ceremony that would either unite it or tear it apart. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, they were not alone. Dawn broke bloody and gold across the cliffs. The celestial grove had been prepared for the ceremony with meticulous attention to detail that bordered on obsession. Silver banners hung from ancient trees. Flowers from every corner of the empire carpeted the ground in waves of color. The flame altar stood at the center, carved from obsidian and inlaid with veins of metal that caught sunlight like trapped fire. Thousands had gathered. Every noble house sent representatives, some eager, some resentful, all calculating how this shift in power would affect their fortunes. Merchants and craftsmen filled the outer edges, invited not out of kindness but politics, a visible reminder that the empire extended beyond marble halls. Soldiers lined the perimeter in ceremonial armor that gleamed like they had been polished for days, and servants stood in sections specifically designated for them, their presence acknowledged for the first time in living memory, because a servant was about to become empress, and that changed everything. The High Regent stood before the altar, wrapped in ceremonial robes, his face unreadable as he prepared to officiate a union he had tried to prevent. But law was law, and Kaelen had made it clear that anyone who disrupted this ceremony would answer to him personally. The threat was unnecessary. Everyone had seen what happened to Varessa. Trumpets sounded, their notes clear and sharp in the morning air. Kaelen entered first, walking the silver path between rows of witnesses. He wore black edged with crimson, his coat embroidered with symbols of conquest and authority. No crown yet. That would come after. But even without it, he radiated power, his presence commanding attention simply by existing. He had spent 10 years learning how to fill a room. He reached the altar and turned to face the path, waiting. Then Serenya appeared. The crowd fell silent so completely that even breath seemed suspended. She walked alone down the silver path, no one to give her away because she belonged to no one, carrying herself with the careful grace of someone still learning how to be seen. The crimson gown moved like liquid fire around her. The circlet Kaelen had given her caught sunlight and threw it back in fragments. Her face was composed, but her eyes carried the weight of everything she had survived to reach this moment. She looked like prophecy given form, like destiny refusing to apologize, like a woman who had been invisible for 18 years finally allowing herself to be witnessed. Nobles who had dismissed her as a servant saw her now and felt their certainty crack. Servants who had worked beside her saw her and felt hope bloom in places they thought had died. And Kaelen saw her and felt something in his chest that had been frozen for a decade begin to thaw. She reached the altar and stood beside him. The High Regent cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the grove. "We gather to witness the union of Emperor Kaelen Draven and Flame Sovereign Serenya Vale. This bond, ordained by prophecy and proven through trial, will unite throne and flame under ancient law." He paused, looking between them. "Do you, Kaelen Draven, accept Serenya Vale as your equal in rule and partner in authority?" Kaelen's voice was steady and certain. "I do." "Do you, Serenya Vale, accept Kaelen Draven as your equal in rule and partner in authority?" Serenya's voice carried across the silence. "I do." The regent gestured toward the altar. "Then seal the bond before the flames." Kaelen and Serenya turned to face the flame altar together. They placed their hands on the obsidian surface simultaneously. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath. Then fire erupted from the altar. Not silver this time, not crimson or gold. Both. Flames of multiple colors intertwining, rising toward the sky in a column of light and heat that could be seen for miles. The bond igniting, accepting, acknowledging. Power recognizing power, prophecy confirming what law had already declared. The flames wrapped around Kaelen and Serenya's joined hands, not burning, just marking, sealing something that went deeper than ceremony or politics. When the fire subsided, they turned to face the crowd still holding hands. The regent's voice rang out. Emperor and Empress, throne and flame, united under ancient law. Cheers erupted from parts of the crowd. Polite applause from others. Stunned silence from nobles still processing the implications. But the ceremony was complete, legal, binding, undeniable. Serenya felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her and did not shrink, did not disappear. She stood beside Kaelen and met their stares with calm certainty. This was real. This was happening. And there was no going back. The celebration that followed was controlled chaos. A feast had been prepared in the great hall, tables groaning under the weight of food from every province. Wine flowed freely. Musicians played. Nobles clustered in groups, their conversations hushed and calculating. Serenya moved through it all feeling like she was watching herself from a distance. People bowed to her now who would have looked through her days ago. Nobles who had called for her execution offered congratulations that tasted like poison wrapped in honey. Servants approached with tears in their eyes, whispering thank you like she had already changed something when all she had done was survive. Kaelen stayed close, his presence an anchor in the storm of attention, but even he could not shield her from everything. Lady Cerys approached, her smile sharp and calculating. "Empress Serenya, you have had quite a remarkable rise. From servant to sovereign in a matter of days." Her tone suggested the rise was unearned. Serenya met her eyes. 18 years is not days, Lady Cerys. I have been in this palace longer than some of the nobles here have held their titles. Cerys' smile tightened. Of course, though one does wonder what lessons a servant learns that prepare her for ruling an empire. The same lessons that teach survival when the powerful treat you as disposable, Serenya said quietly. Patience, observation, understanding that cruelty often comes from fear, and that people who have never been powerless rarely understand what power actually costs. She took a step closer. I've spent 18 years watching nobles make decisions that affected lives they never had to see. Watching policy written by people who never missed a meal or worried about winter or feared being discarded when they became inconvenient. Her voice remained calm but carried steel beneath. So to answer your question, I learned how the empire looks from the bottom, and that might be the most important perspective a ruler can have. Ceres's expression flickered with something that might have been respect or resentment, or both. Then she bowed slightly and withdrew. Kaelen appeared at Serenya's side. You handled that well. Serenya's hands were shaking. I thought I was going to vomit. You did not show it. That is what matters. He guided her toward a quieter corner away from the crush of politics. This will be your life now, he said. Constant performance, constant judgment. People looking for any sign of weakness they can exploit. Sounds terrible. It is. Kaelen's smile was grim. But you do not have to do it alone anymore. And neither do I. He raised his glass. To partnership. To prophecy. To making the empire uncomfortable enough that it has to change. Serenya touched her glass to his. And to surviving what comes next. They drank as the celebration swirled around them, as the empire processed this shift, as the future hung uncertain and terrifying and somehow full of possibility. 3 days after the wedding, Kaelen brought Serenya to a chamber she had never seen. It was deep in the palace, past guarded doors and winding corridors, hidden from casual discovery. The room was circular, its walls lined with shelves holding texts bound in leather and metal. At the center stood a pedestal with a single book laid open. The First Chronicle, Kaelen said. He gestured for her to approach. Serenya moved to the pedestal and looked down at pages covered in script so old the ink had faded to brown. What is this? She asked. The original prophecy. Not the version the priests recite, not the interpretation that has been filtered through generations of politics. The actual words written 300 years ago. Kaelen stood beside her. Read it. Serenya's eyes traced the ancient text, struggling with archaic phrasing and words that had fallen out of use. But the meaning emerged. A prophecy not about conquest or domination, about balance, about a sovereign of living flame rising from obscurity to stand beside the crown when the empire teetered on the edge of collapse. Not to rule through fear, but to remind the powerful that authority came with responsibility. Not to dominate, but to unify fractured territories before civil war consumed everything. The prophecy spoke of hardship, preparing the flame sovereign, of suffering teaching compassion that power born from privilege could never learn. It spoke of an empire that had lost its way, valuing blood over merit, tradition over justice, control over truth. And it spoke of fire that would either cleanse or consume depending on whether the empire chose to change or cling to the past. Serenya read in silence, her throat tight. This changes everything, she whispered. Kaelen nodded. The priests have been interpreting this for generations, but they focused on the parts about power and authority. They ignored the parts about responsibility and sacrifice. He traced a line in the text. They wanted a flame sovereign who would validate their existing hierarchy. Someone noble. Someone they could control. Someone who would not challenge the foundations. His eyes met hers. They got you instead. Someone who understands what it means to be powerless. Someone who has seen the empire from the bottom and knows exactly what needs to change. Serenya's hands trembled slightly. I do not know if I can be what this prophecy demands. Kaelen's voice was gentle. You already are. You survived 18 years invisible and still maintained your humanity. You faced execution and chose mercy. You stood in that arena and proved that power does not corrupt everyone. He took her hands. The prophecy does not demand perfection. It demands someone who understands the cost of power. And suffering, Serenya, is the only teacher that lesson has. She looked down at the text again, at words written centuries ago by someone who had somehow seen this moment. What happens now? She asked. Now we do the hardest thing, Kaelen said. We try to change an empire that does not want to change. We force nobles to see servants as people. We make laws that protect the powerless instead of just the privileged. We remind everyone that the throne exists to serve the empire, not the other way around. He smiled grimly. And we probably make more enemies in the process. Serenya thought about Marin's advice, about not letting the crown change who she was, about staying true to the girl who had scrubbed floors while dreaming of something better. Then let them be enemies, she said quietly. I did not survive 18 years of invisibility to become just another noble who forgets where she came from. Kaelen's expression softened into something that looked like pride and love and relief all tangled together. That is exactly why the throne chose you. 2 weeks after the wedding, Serenya issued her first decree as Flame Sovereign. The council chamber was packed with nobles, all of them summoned, none of them pleased about being commanded rather than invited. Serenya stood at the head of the table with Kaelen beside her, her crimson robes marking her status, her expression calm despite the nerves churning in her stomach. She had spent days crafting this, weighing every word, knowing that her first act would set the tone for everything that followed. The decree is simple, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. Effective immediately, all palace servants will receive wages above subsistence level, housing will be improved, working conditions will be inspected regularly, and any noble found abusing their staff will face penalties up to and including loss of title. Silence crashed through the room, then erupted into chaos. Voices overlapping, protests shouted, outrage performed. Lord Matthias stood, his face red. This is absurd. The cost alone would bankrupt half the noble houses. Then half the noble houses have been profiting from exploitation, Serenya said calmly, and that ends now. Lady Saris leaned forward. You cannot simply overturn centuries of tradition because you sympathize with servants. I am not overturning tradition because I sympathize, Serenya said. I am overturning it because it is wrong. Because building an empire on the backs of people you treat as disposable creates a foundation that will eventually collapse. She looked around the table. You all saw what happened when the throne chose someone unexpected. You saw the empire nearly tear itself apart. That is what happens when you ignore the suffering at the base of your hierarchy for so long that even prophecy has to intervene. Kaelen's voice cut through the murmurs. The decree stands. Any noble who refuses to comply will answer to the crown directly. The nobles exchanged glances, calculating whether defiance was worth the cost. Most decided it was not. The decree passed, and for the first time in the empire's history, servants were acknowledged as people deserving of dignity. It was a small change, but small changes, given time, became revolutions. 6 months passed. The empire did not collapse. It changed, slowly, painfully, with resistance at every step. But it changed. Nobles who had relied on cheap labor found themselves forced to actually pay for services. Some adapted, some raged. A few lost their titles for refusing to comply. Servants who had spent their lives invisible found themselves with choices they had never imagined. Some stayed in service but under better conditions. Some left to pursue trades or education now that they could afford it. Some simply rested for the first time in their lives. The outer provinces, hearing about the reforms, sent delegations requesting similar protections. Kaelen and Serenya traveled to territories that had been ignored for decades, listening to grievances, implementing changes, slowly knitting the fractured empire back together. It was exhausting work. Every day brought new challenges, new resistance, new evidence that changing entrenched power structures was like trying to redirect a river with bare hands. But they did it together, and that made the impossible merely difficult. One evening, Serenya found herself back in the eastern tower where she and Kaelen had stood the night before the wedding. She looked out at the city below, at lights scattered across the darkness, and thought about how much had changed, how much she had changed. She was no longer the girl who scrubbed floors, but she was not entirely the empress either. She was something in between, still learning, still adapting, still terrified of failing. Footsteps approached from behind. Kaelen, as always. He stood beside her, looking out at the same view. Thinking about running away, he asked with a slight smile. Every single day. Me too. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Serenya spoke quietly. Do you think we are making a difference? Or are we just rearranging furniture on a sinking ship? Kaelen considered the question. Both, probably. The Empire has problems that run deeper than we can fix in a lifetime. But every person who gets paid fairly instead of exploited matters. Every servant who can leave an abusive house without starving matters. Every child who grows up seeing that change is possible matters. He turned to face her. We are not going to save everyone. We are not going to fix everything. But we can make it better than it was. And maybe that is enough. Serenya leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. "What do you think the prophecy meant by cleanse or consume?" she asked. Kaelen was quiet for a long moment. "I think it meant that fire can purify or destroy depending on how it is wielded, that power can heal or harm, that we get to choose which every single day. And what have we chosen?" "To try," Kaelen said. "To fight for something better even when it seems impossible. To refuse to become the kind of rulers who forget that the people at the bottom are people." He kissed the top of her head. "That might be all prophecy ever asked for. Not perfection, just the willingness to try." Another month passed. Varessa reappeared. She had been sentenced to labor among the people she had dismissed, stripped of title and privilege, reduced to the same invisibility Serenya had known her entire life. Reports said she had struggled at first, raging against the injustice of being treated like everyone else. But slowly, something had changed. She appeared before the throne one morning, thinner, her hands calloused from work, her eyes carrying something that might have been humility or might have been exhaustion. She knelt before Serenya and Kaelen. "I came to confess," she said quietly. "You already confessed," Kaelen said. "The trial established your guilt." "Not that," Varessa said. "I came to confess that I was wrong." She looked up at Serenya. "I spent my entire life believing I deserved power because of my bloodline, because I was told from birth that I was special, that I mattered more than others. And when the throne chose you instead, I could not accept it because it meant everything I believed was a lie." Her voice cracked slightly. "I have spent months living the life you lived, being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like I do not matter, and I finally understand what you already knew." "What?" "That power is not a reward for being born into the right family. It is a responsibility that should go to those who understand what it costs to be powerless." Tears tracked down her face. "I cannot undo what I did. I cannot take back the poison or the lies or the cruelty, but I can acknowledge that you were right and I was wrong. And I can spend the rest of my life trying to be better than what I was." Serenya stood and descended from the throne. She stopped in front of Varessa, looking down at the woman who had tried to destroy her. Then she extended her hand. "Get up." Varessa took her hand and rose on shaking legs. "You tried to kill me," Serenya said quietly. "You poisoned me, framed me, did everything in your power to erase me. I know, and I could have killed you in that arena. The Empire would have celebrated it. No one would have questioned it. I know." Serenya's grip tightened slightly. "But I chose mercy instead. Not because you deserved it, because I needed to prove that power does not have to be cruel, that we can break cycles instead of perpetuating them." She let go of Varessa's hand. "You will never be noble again. That title is gone. But if you want to help build something better, there is work to be done. Real work. Helping implement the reforms. Making sure they reach the people who need them most." Varessa's eyes widened. "You would trust me?" "No," Serenya said bluntly. "But I will give you the chance to earn trust. That is more than you gave me." Varessa bowed deeply, her composure finally breaking completely. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Serenya said. "Prove I was right to spare you." Varessa left the throne room with purpose in her steps, and Serenya returned to Kaelen's side. "That was dangerous," he said quietly. "She could betray you again." "She could," Serenya agreed. "But if we only trust people who have never failed us, we will always be alone. And I am tired of people being alone." Kaelen smiled and took her hand. "That is why the throne chose you." Years passed. The Empire continued changing, slowly transforming from a hierarchy built on exploitation into something that resembled actual justice. It was not perfect. It never would be. There were still nobles who clung to the old ways, still corruption that needed rooting out, still suffering that reforms could not quite reach. But it was better. Measurably, undeniably better. And on a night when silver winds moved through the celestial grove and stars scattered across the sky like prophecy written in light, Serenya and Kaelen stood together overlooking the empire they had changed. They were older now, marked by years of ruling, by battles fought and won and lost, by the slow erosion that came from carrying weight no crown could balance. But they were not alone, and that made the weight bearable. "Do you regret it?" Kaelen asked quietly. "Everything you gave up. The chance at a simpler life." Serenya thought about the girl who had scrubbed floors and dreamed of being invisible, about the woman she had become through fire and prophecy, and choosing mercy when cruelty would have been easier. No, she said finally, because suffering taught me something that privilege never could, that the measure of a person is not what they do when they have power, but what they remember about powerlessness. She turned to face him. The throne is not a reward. It is a wound carried willingly. Some seek it for glory. Some inherit it through blood. But those destined to transform empires accept the crown, knowing it will demand sacrifice and certainty and pieces of the soul no victory can restore. Her hand found his. Still we rise. Still we rule. Because when history corners the worthy, surrender becomes impossible. Kaelen pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I love you, he said. Not because you are the flame sovereign, not because prophecy chose you, but because you looked at an empire built on cruelty and decided to make it kind. Serenya smiled, tears tracking down her face. I love you too. For seeing me when I was invisible. For kneeling when you could have commanded. For choosing partnership over power. They kissed beneath the stars as the empire slept around them. And in that moment, they were not emperor and empress. Just two people who had survived the impossible and chosen each other in the aftermath. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not through conquest or domination, through mercy and change and the slow, painful work of building something better than what they had inherited. The fire had cleansed, the empire had been reborn. And Serenya Vale, who had spent 18 years invisible, stood beside Emperor Kaelen Draven as living proof that destiny did not follow bloodlines. It followed those brave enough to burn away the old world and build a new one from the ash. Together. Always together. And as dawn broke over the cliffs of the Black Meridian, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, the empire woke to face another day. Changed. Changing still. And finally, after centuries of cruelty disguised as tradition, learning what it meant to be worthy of the people it ruled, the throne and the flame, united, unbroken, and determined to make sure that no one else would ever have to disappear to survive. Sonnet 4.5